From 1975 to 1979, the Khmer Rouge ruled Cambodia. Though short, their rule resulted in the death of 25% of the country's population. The regime wished to rebuild Cambodia, to free it from all foreign influence, and this was achieved through extreme violence and brutality. In this video, we will delve into the harrowing story of the Cambodian Khmer Rouge, which inflicted unimaginable suffering on the Cambodian population. Millions died or were murdered in cold blood as the group tried to implement its extreme ideology. During the Cold War, Cambodia maintained a stance of neutrality during the rule of Prince Sihanouk. This fragile position became untenable with the war raging in neighboring Vietnam. The United States began a secret bombing campaign in Cambodia targeting Viet Cong supply lines, but the collateral damage devastated rural communities and sowed seeds of resentment against the government, who were unable to prevent the attacks. In 1970, a coup led by General Lon Nol removed Sihanouk from power and established a pro-American government, instantly plunging the nation into civil war. Sihanouk, now in exile, formed an alliance with the Khmer Rouge, a communist guerrilla group led by Pol Pot. The Khmer Rouge capitalized on growing rural discontent, using anti-American propaganda and promises of land reform to rally support among Cambodia's peasants, while Lon Nol's government struggled to maintain order. Over the next 5 years, the Khmer Rouge gained momentum, aided by the chaos of war. By the 17th of April, 1975, the Khmer Rouge marched into Phnom Penh, effectively seizing power. Cambodians initially welcomed the victory, hoping it would mean an end to the bloodshed. However, the Khmer Rouge's extreme ideology was soon clear to everyone. Within hours of taking the capital, they ordered the evacuation of Phnom Penh, claiming it was temporary and necessary due to American threats. Nearly 2 million residents were marched into the countryside, leaving the city empty. Families were torn apart, and many died along the way from exhaustion or starvation, while others were murdered. The Khmer Rouge forced the city dwellers to live and work in collective farming communes. These so-called new people were primarily urban residents and were seen as enemies of the revolution due to their urban way of life. They were made to work long hours in the fields, often with no prior experience in agriculture or laboring. Food was scarce, with everyone receiving inadequate rations, which was not enough to sustain them long term. Disease, overwork, and malnutrition killed many, while those who failed to meet quotas or showed signs of resistance were executed, often with axes and machetes. Babies were killed in an even more horrific way, as they were simply swung against trees or stones. For the Khmer Rouge, the countryside was a tool to create their new utopian society. Forced labor was a cornerstone of the Khmer Rouge's vision for a classless agrarian society. After seizing power in 1975, the regime sought to transform Cambodia into a self-sufficient communist utopia, free from all outside influence. The Khmer Rouge divided the population into two groups: base people, who were rural peasants considered loyal to the revolution, and new people, urban dwellers deemed to have been corrupted by capitalist or Western ideas. The new people faced the harshest treatment. Laborers were forced to work more than 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, under the watchful eyes of armed Khmer Rouge soldiers, who were willing to use violence for any small offense or mistake. They built dams, dug canals, and farmed rice fields with primitive tools. The work was physically demanding, and failure to meet quotas was punishable by death. The regime's obsession with self-reliance only increased the people's suffering. Foreign aid and modern farming equipment was rejected in favor of old, traditional methods, and the unrealistic production targets led to constant failures. Starvation, exhaustion, and disease became rampant, claiming hundreds of thousands of lives. The forced labor was not just about producing food. It was also a tool to break the will of the Cambodian population. The Khmer Rouge used it to strip individuals of their identity, autonomy, and dignity, reducing them to expendable tools of the state. For many, the labor camps became mass graves. The Khmer Rouge persecuted intellectuals, teachers, businessmen, musicians, and educated individuals such as government workers. This was done in order to cleanse the population, to remove anyone who had been corrupted by Western ideas, such as capitalism, modern science, education, and non-traditional music. The Khmer Rouge viewed intellectuals and educated people as threats to their ideology, and so all schools, universities, and hospitals were forcibly closed. Teachers, doctors, lawyers, writers, and anyone who held positions of authority or expertise were labeled as enemies of the revolution. Even wearing glasses, which they believed was a sign of education and literacy, could lead to execution. Musicians and artists performing both traditional and non-traditional Western-inspired music were also targeted, as their work represented influences that the Khmer Rouge was trying to eliminate. Pol Pot's vision of Year Zero, returning to the pre-modern Cambodian Golden Age, aimed to strip Cambodia of its history, erasing centuries of art, music, and knowledge. Traditional songs and performances were banned, and countless artists were murdered or sent to labor camps where they perished. The only music permitted was pro-Khmer Rouge propaganda music, often written and performed by imprisoned musicians, which was sometimes played at work camps as a way to propagandize the population. The Khmer Rouge justified their actions through paranoia and propaganda, claiming that intellectuals were counter-revolutionaries. In their effort to transform society into a classless, rural collective, they declared that only peasants, the base people, were pure and trustworthy, as they had not been corrupted. The educated elite, or new people, were seen as polluted by modernity and foreign influence. The result was a cultural genocide alongside the physical genocide. Schools were closed, popular musicians were executed, temples were seized, Buddhist clergy were killed, and Cambodian society spent 4 years in total cultural isolation. Tuol Sleng, more commonly known as S-21, was the most infamous political prison operated by the Khmer Rouge. Over 180 of these prisons existed during the regime, but none were as notorious as S-21. Between 1976 and 1979, as many as 17,000 people were imprisoned here. The inmates were chosen by the Santabal, the Khmer Rouge's secret police force, equivalent to the Gestapo or Stasi. The prison was based in a former high school which had been converted to an inescapable compound. Classrooms were repurposed as cramped cells or dedicated torture chambers designed for violent interrogations. Prisoners sent to S-21 were never expected to leave. They were accused of crimes against the state, such as espionage or counter-revolutionary activities, but in reality, these charges were often fabricated, as the regime sought not justice, but confessions to justify their executions. The regime's paranoia meant that many of S-21's inmates were members of the Khmer Rouge, and many loyal soldiers were imprisoned here. Life inside S-21 was hell on earth. Prisoners were photographed upon arrival, stripped of all their possessions, and forced to write detailed autobiographies under duress, telling their entire life story until the day they were imprisoned. They were confined in cells and bound to the concrete floor or walls. The regime wished only to keep its prisoners alive until they had given a confession, so good health was not important and their food rations were low. Starvation was common, and prisoners resorted to eating insects when guards weren't watching. Those caught scavenging were beaten viciously. Interrogating accused enemies of the state was the main job of S-21, and torture was the primary method used to extract confessions regardless of their truth. Prisoners were electrocuted, beaten, suffocated with plastic bags, and subjected to other inhumane methods. One common accusation was that prisoners were spies working for enemy nations, such as the United States or Vietnam. Guards forced them to confess, sometimes using bizarre tactics like making prisoners bow to a picture of a dog with Ho Chi Minh's head. There were 3 levels of interrogation in S-21: cold, hot, and chewing. Cold interrogations involved mostly verbal interrogation. Hot relied mostly on physical torture, while chewing was reserved for only the most severe cases, where the most brutal torture methods were used. Executions were carried out at Chuang Ek, more famously known as the killing fields. To conserve ammunition, victims were sometimes bludgeoned to death with clubs or iron bars. Not all of S-21's victims were Cambodian. New Zealander Kerry Hamill was captured by a Khmer Rouge vessel while on a sailing trip. His Canadian crewmate was shot during the interaction, while Kerry and another crewmate spent months in S-21, enduring torture and eventual execution. By the end of the Khmer Rouge, the Cambodian countryside was littered with mass graves. Survivors of S-21 were exceedingly rare, with only 12 known to have made it out alive. Von Nath was a painter. His life was saved by his skill, as he was used to create portraits of Pol Pot. Another survivor, Chum May, was kept alive because he was a skilled mechanic and could repair equipment, such as the prison's sewing machine and typewriters. Today, the prison serves as the Tuol Sleng Genocide Museum, serving as a bleak reminder of the atrocities committed by the Khmer Rouge. Photographs of the prisoners, torture instruments, and personal accounts ensure that the world remembers the unimaginable suffering endured within its walls. Child soldiers were an important part of the Khmer Rouge regime, as it believed these children could be perfectly indoctrinated into the regime's ideology. Children were considered ideal recruits because of their young, impressionable minds. The Khmer Rouge conditioned them with state propaganda, teaching them to value loyalty to Angkar above all else. Child soldiers as young as 12 sometimes even rose to command entire work camps. Their young age often made them particularly ruthless, as they were eager to prove their loyalty with extreme violence, and work camps commanded by children were considered some of the worst. Children were a vital part of the Khmer Rouge, as they were encouraged to inform on adults guilty of crimes such as theft of food. In some cases, children who had informed on adults were made to take part in the adults' punishment, which they did enthusiastically. Even after the demise of the Khmer Rouge, there was a long-lasting distrust of children in Cambodian society. The demise of the Khmer Rouge began in 1978 with the Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia. After years of escalating tensions and cross-border attacks by Khmer Rouge forces, Vietnam launched a full-scale military offensive in December 1978. The Khmer Rouge failed to put up an effective resistance, and by January 7, 1979, Vietnamese troops had captured Phnom Penh. Pol Pot and those who remained loyal to the Khmer Rouge were forced to retreat back into the jungle, as they had been before their rise to power. From their jungle strongholds, still 10,000 men strong in the mid-1990s, the Khmer Rouge waged a guerrilla war against the Vietnamese-backed government. Though weakened and fragmented, they persisted. Hundreds died every year from Khmer Rouge attacks. Villages were attacked and thousands were forced to flee. A few years before their demise, the Khmer Rouge still controlled roughly 20% of the country, allowing Pol Pot to live in freedom and comfort. The group was dealt a major blow when the Cambodian government offered soldiers amnesty, land, and even positions in the Cambodian army if they peacefully surrendered. The Khmer Rouge would not fall completely until 1998 with the death of Pol Pot. By then, the movement had fractured, and its leaders either defected, faced trial, or faded into obscurity, finally ending one of the darkest chapters in Cambodia's history. 2 million people, 25% of the population, died either from murder, disease, or starvation. But unlike many of history's great atrocities, the Cambodian genocide is still fresh in the minds of many Cambodians. Great strides have been made to move on, but the atrocities of the Khmer Rouge still hold an important place in the lives of modern Cambodians.